My 7-year-old daughter stood in front of a crowded table, dressed in the sparkly gold dress she picked out herself. Her little fingers were gripping a small gift box. Every adult in the room was laughing and clinking glasses, too distracted to notice her, except me. I was watching closely. She looked directly at her grandmother, lifted the box slightly, and said, "Grandma, Dad told me to give this to you if you ever ignored me again." Everything stopped. Forks froze midair. The music faded into background noise. Her grandmother, my husband's mother, gave a tight, confused smile, as if it were a joke. But when she opened the box, she didn't laugh. She screamed. A sharp, guttural sound tore through the room, louder than the Christmas carols, louder than the gasps, louder than the silence that followed. People rushed over to see what was inside, but I already knew. My husband had packed that box months ago. He told me it was for the day his mother went too far. That day was today. Let me tell you how we got here. How my daughter became invisible in a room full of gifts, and how that small box shattered every fake smile that had held this family together for years. When I married Travis, I thought I was marrying into a big loving family. They were loud, close-knit, always organizing cookouts, game nights, and holiday parties. His mother, Lorraine, was the center of it all. She had a voice that could quiet a room and an opinion about everything. I thought that was just how strong women ran families. I respected her. I really wanted her to like me. At first, she acted like she did. She smiled during dinners, complimented my cooking, hugged me goodbye. But it didn't take long before I noticed the shift. She would forget to include me in family group texts. She would comment on how different I was from the women in their family, how I didn't grow up with the same values. It was always subtle, just enough to make me question whether it was in my head. Then Zaya came along. Zaya is my daughter from my first marriage. She was 2 when Travis came into our lives. He didn't hesitate. He stepped in with patience, love, and every bit of the care a father should give. When we got married, he adopted her legally. We never used the word step in our house. She was his daughter in every way that mattered, and he was her dad. But Lorraine never accepted that. At first, she pretended. She'd send Zaya a birthday card or bring her a little something on holidays, but the difference was always there. Zaya didn't get invited to cousin sleepovers. She wasn't included in matching Christmas pajamas. She would sit quietly during family events while the other grandkids were doted on. Lorraine would call Maddie her little princess, buy Jonah his favorite sports gear, and then hand Zaya a plastic toy or a book she clearly never looked at. Zaya noticed. Kids always do. I tried to explain it away. I told Zaya that Grandma was just forgetful, that she loved her in her own way. But every year, it got harder to justify. At Thanksgiving, Lorraine gave each grandchild a personalized plate with their name painted in gold. Zaya's seat was set with one of the extras from the back of the cabinet. That night, Zaya whispered to me, "Maybe she thinks I'm just visiting." I didn't know what to say. Travis heard it too. He didn't speak up, but I saw his jaw clench. That was the first time I thought maybe he was starting to see it too. Still, we kept showing up. I told myself it was for the bigger picture, for family unity, for tradition, for Zaya to grow up with cousins and holiday memories. I told myself love didn't need to be proven with gifts or matching pajamas. But deep down, I was lying to myself. I was staying quiet because I didn't want to be seen as the problem. I didn't want to make Travis choose between his mother and me. And every time I swallowed my hurt, I convinced myself I was doing the right thing for Zaya, that being the bigger person would teach her something important. But I didn't realize it was teaching her that being treated as less was something we had to accept. Travis and I argued about it more than once. I would bring it up in quiet, exhausted voices after Zaya had gone to bed. He would say he noticed, but didn't know how to handle it. He didn't want to hurt his mom. I asked him, "What about Zaya?" He would nod, promise to talk to her eventually, then go silent again. By the time this particular Christmas rolled around, I was emotionally worn thin. I had packed matching outfits for the kids. I brought extra cookies to share. I wrapped thoughtful gifts for everyone in the family. I told myself this year might be different. But something inside me had changed too. I was no longer hoping for approval. I was watching, waiting, preparing for the moment when being quiet would no longer be the kind thing to do. And that moment came faster than I expected. It was the way Lorraine smiled as she handed Maddie a brand new iPad, how she kissed Jonah's cheek before handing him a thick envelope of cash. Then she turned to Zaya, handed her a lavender candle, and said, "Didn't want you to feel completely left out." That was when I looked at Travis. He didn't speak. He didn't blink. But something in his face shifted, and that's when I knew he hadn't forgotten what he told Zaya months ago. He hadn't forgotten the box. Neither had she. Lorraine's house was always perfect during the holidays. She had a huge artificial tree that reached the ceiling, trimmed with gold ornaments and twinkling lights. Every branch looked like it came out of a catalog. The fireplace was lit, the table was set with fine china, and there were so many wrapped gifts under the tree, you could barely see the base. It should have felt magical. But as soon as we walked in, I felt my stomach tighten. Zaya walked in ahead of me, her curls bouncing with each step, wearing the gold dress she picked out herself. She clutched a small wrapped gift in her hands, the one she had made for Lorraine in art class, a painted wooden trinket box with little glued-on rhinestones. She had written Grandma in crooked glitter letters across the lid. She was so proud of it. Lorraine barely looked at her when we said hello. She hugged Maddie and Jonah right away, laughing loudly and saying how big they were getting. She handed Maddie a velvet pouch and winked. "Don't open it yet," she said, smiling. Then she turned to Zaya and said, "Hi, sweetie, you look festive." She glanced down at the gift in Zaya's hand, took it without really looking, and set it on a side table like it was a napkin someone handed her by mistake. Zaya didn't say anything. She looked at me for a moment, then took a seat on the couch next to Maddie. The kids chatted and played while the adults made small talk. I sat at the edge of it all, watching my daughter shrink slowly into the background of her own family. After dinner, it was time for gifts. Lorraine always made a production out of it. She sat in her armchair and handed them out one by one, calling each child up like they were royalty. Jonah was first. He opened an envelope stuffed with cash. Everyone clapped. Maddie went next. She opened a new iPad and a matching bracelet set made of real silver and crystals. She hugged Lorraine so hard the iPad nearly slipped from her hands. Then Lorraine called Zaya's name. There was a long pause before she held up a small gift bag and said, "This is for you, sweetheart. I didn't want you to feel completely left out." Zaya stood up quietly, walked over, and took the bag. Inside was a lavender-scented candle in a plain glass jar. There was a tag attached that read, "To Travis's girl." That was it. No envelope, no toy, no sparkle, just a candle and a tag that felt like a knife. I looked at Travis. He was staring at the floor, his fingers laced tightly together, jaw tight. He didn't say a word. Zaya sat down next to me, resting the candle in her lap. She didn't cry, she didn't frown, but I could see her pulling inward, slowly closing off, the kind of quiet that stays with a child long after the day ends. Lorraine moved on as if nothing had happened. She handed out more gifts. Everyone laughed, ate dessert, toasted with champagne, but I wasn't really hearing any of it. I couldn't take my eyes off Zaya. She stayed polite, thanked Lorraine with a soft, "Thank you," when asked, and pretended to be interested in the bracelet Maddie was showing off. Later in the kitchen, I confronted Travis. "You need to say something," I whispered. "She called your daughter Travis's girl, like she's a guest here." He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "I told Zaya to give her the box if this ever happened again." I told her she could decide when it was time. I stared at him. "You're serious?" He nodded. "She remembers." Back in the car on the way home, Zaya sat quietly in the back seat holding her candle. Her voice was small when she asked, "Is Grandma mad at me?" I turned around and reached for her hand, but Travis spoke first. "No, sweetheart," he said. "Grandma just forgot something important. But I think she's about to remember." Zaya looked down at the box in her lap, the one Travis had given her months ago, wrapped in simple red paper. She nodded once and said, "Then I want to give it to her tomorrow." That's when I knew. This wasn't just another ignored moment we were going to brush off. This wasn't going to be one more lesson in patience or polite silence. Something was shifting. My daughter wasn't going to stay invisible. Not anymore. When we got home that night, I helped Zaya out of the car while Travis grabbed the leftover cookies from the back seat. She clutched the candle in one hand and the small box in the other, both wrapped like fragile memories. I could tell she was holding in more than just the weight of her things. She was quiet, but her face held something calm and steady, like she'd already made up her mind. I asked if she wanted to take a bath or watch a movie before bed. She said no, she just wanted to get ready for tomorrow. I paused. What's tomorrow? She looked at me like I should know. Brunch at Grandma's. I'm giving her the box. That was the first time I felt my breath catch in my chest, not from fear, but from the simple certainty in her voice. There was no hesitation, no questions, just a decision made by a 7-year-old who had finally seen enough. Travis came into the room as I was brushing Zaya's hair. She looked up at him and asked, "Can I still give it to her?" He nodded. "It's your choice, Zaya. I told you that from the beginning." She smiled, but it wasn't the usual bubbly grin she gave when we promised her ice cream or told her we were going to the zoo. It was smaller, more focused, like she understood the weight of what she was carrying, like she knew what it meant to be heard. After she went to bed, I finally asked Travis what exactly he had written in that box. He sat down across from me at the kitchen table and looked exhausted, like he had been holding in a storm for too long. "A few months ago, I was watching her play with Maddie during Jonah's birthday party," he said. "They were all in the backyard. Lorraine called the kids in for cake. Maddie and Jonah got slices with extra frosting and sprinkles. Zaya got the end piece. No decoration, no candle, nothing." I remembered that day. I had tried to tell myself it wasn't intentional. "She came up to me and asked if she was someone's cousin too," he continued. "That night, I sat down and wrote a letter. I printed the adoption papers again. I packed the box. I told Zaya she could give it to my mom if she ever made her feel like she didn't belong again." My throat tightened. "And you never told me?" "I didn't want to make it a fight," he said. "I didn't want to drag you into another argument about my family, but I needed Zaya to know I saw it. I needed her to feel like she had something to stand on." I had spent years hoping Travis would speak up, years waiting for him to draw a line. And here he was, having quietly drawn it, not with shouting or confrontation, but by handing his daughter the power to say enough. The next morning, Zaya got ready like it was picture day at school. She asked if she could wear her sparkly gold dress again. She wanted to redo her curls. She chose the same glittery headband she wore the day Travis signed the adoption papers. She didn't say it was for luck. She didn't need to. I knew. In the car, she held the red box on her lap with both hands. No fidgeting, no second thoughts. When we arrived at Lorraine's house, everything looked the same. The same wreath on the door, the same smell of cinnamon and ham, the same polite greetings and hollow compliments. But something felt different this time. Not in the room, just in us. We were no longer visitors trying to fit in. We were a family walking in with our truth. Zaya sat quietly during brunch. She didn't touch her plate much. Lorraine complimented Maddie's dress 3 times. She didn't mention Zaya's once. When everyone had finished eating and started passing around desserts, Zaya stood up. No one noticed at first. Then she walked to the head of the table, right where Lorraine sat with her wine glass, and placed the box in front of her. "Grandma," she said clearly, "Dad told me to give this to you if you ever ignored me again." The room went still. Lorraine gave a small, confused laugh. "What's this, sweetheart?" Zaya didn't answer. She stepped back and sat down. Travis reached for my hand under the table and held it tight. The box was still closed, but not for long. Lorraine picked up the box like it was a prank. She turned it over in her hands, raised an eyebrow, and gave a half laugh that didn't match the silence spreading across the table. Everyone was watching now. Travis's sister looked confused. Maddie stared. Jonah kept eating a cookie, not understanding what was happening. Lorraine peeled the red wrapping paper slowly, like she was performing for the room, but her smile faded the moment she opened the lid. On top sat a photo in a white frame. It was of Travis in a hospital chair, holding Zaya the day she turned 2. She had cake on her cheeks and her arms wrapped around his neck. Someone had taken it during her adoption celebration. The caption written in gold at the bottom read, "Day 1, Dad." Beneath the photo was a sealed envelope. Lorraine's face shifted. Her mouth pulled tight as she reached inside and opened the envelope with trembling hands. She pulled out the first document. It was a copy of Zaya's adoption papers, legal, signed by a judge, with Travis's name clearly printed under father. The court seal was stamped at the bottom. She blinked hard, like maybe if she looked again, it would say something different. But it didn't. Next, she opened a folded letter. It was written in Travis's handwriting. He didn't flinch as she started to read, but I felt his grip tighten around my fingers under the table. Lorraine's lips moved as she read silently, her face falling with every word. It said, "Mom, if you're reading this, it means you have hurt my daughter again. Not just mine by love, but mine by law, by promise, and by choice. I have spent years watching you treat Zaya like an outsider. I hoped it would change. I hoped you would open your heart the way I did. But if she ever had to hand you this box, it means she saw what I saw, that you don't consider her real. Zaya is my child. She is your granddaughter. And if you cannot love her equally, then you don't love me. I will not allow her to grow up thinking she has to earn a place in this family. She already belongs. She always has. If you cannot accept that, you will no longer be welcome in our home or in our lives. Travis." When she finished reading, Lorraine dropped the letter onto the table like it burned her fingers. Her face was pale. She looked around, searching for someone to save her. No one spoke. Then, like something inside her cracked, she screamed. Not a sob, not a gasp. A scream, sharp and raw, like a curtain had been ripped away from everything she had pretended to be. She stood up so fast her chair scraped against the hardwood. Maddie flinched. Jonah froze. Her sister reached out to steady the table, but Lorraine had already backed away, muttering, "I can't believe you'd embarrass me like this." Travis finally stood. "We didn't embarrass you," he said. "You did that all by yourself." Lorraine pointed at me. "This is her doing. This girl turned you against your own mother." I stood too. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "No," I said. "Zaya gave you a gift. She gave you the chance to see her. You chose not to." For a moment, all you could hear was the sound of the fireplace crackling. Zaya sat quietly, watching, not scared, not confused, just watching the truth unfold. Travis turned to her and held out his hand. "Ready to go?" She nodded and stood up. I grabbed our coats and helped her into hers. No one stopped us. No one said goodbye. We walked out together, me, my husband, and our daughter, leaving behind the house filled with decorations, perfect centerpieces, and empty approval. In the car, Zaya buckled her seatbelt and looked straight ahead. She didn't say anything right away. Then softly she asked, "Do you think she read the whole letter?" Travis looked at her in the rearview mirror and said, "Every single word." Zaya smiled. Not big, not dramatic, just enough to tell me that something inside her had settled. Not because Lorraine had changed, but because she didn't need her to anymore. We didn't go back to Lorraine's house after that day. No more birthday parties, no more forced holidays, no more pretending. There were no angry follow-up texts or emotional phone calls, just silence. She didn't reach out, and we didn't chase her. For once, there was peace. At first, I thought Zaya might ask about her. I expected questions, maybe some sadness. But what I saw instead was a quiet freedom. She stopped watching the door during family events. She stopped asking why she didn't get the same presents or why her name was left off the group crafts. She stopped measuring her worth by someone else's treatment. Something had shifted. One afternoon, a week after Christmas, a small padded envelope arrived in the mail. It was addressed to Zaya. Inside was a bracelet, silver, with a tiny heart charm, and a handwritten note from Maddie. It said, "I'm sorry Grandma was mean. You're my cousin forever. I picked this with my allowance." Zaya read the note twice, then slid the bracelet on her wrist. She didn't ask if she could wear it every day. She just did. That single act meant more to her than a dozen expensive gifts ever could. It reminded me that children don't need perfection. They just need to feel chosen. They need to know someone sees them, hears them, and believes they matter. As for Travis, something changed in him too. For years, he had carried the guilt of standing between his mother and his daughter. He had tried to bridge two worlds that would never truly meet. But after that brunch, I saw something different in his eyes. Not just resolve, but relief. He had made his choice. He chose Zaya without apology, without conditions, and without regret. One night, I found him sitting on the edge of her bed while she slept, just watching her breathe. He looked up at me and said, "I should have done it sooner." "You did it exactly when she needed you to," I told him. We started making new traditions, smaller ones, slower, more intentional. Zaya helped us decorate cookies for neighbors. We built pillow forts and watched movies in pajamas. We didn't try to replace what was lost. We just focused on building what was real. People talk about cutting off toxic family like it's easy, like it's a clean line you draw and move on. It's not. It hurts, even when it's necessary, even when you're right. But what hurts more is watching your child shrink to make room for someone else's comfort. I won't do that again. I won't ask my daughter to keep accepting less just because someone else refuses to give more. That day at Lorraine's table wasn't about drama or revenge. It wasn't about making a scene. It was about Zaya taking her space in a room where she had always been treated like a guest. It was about her saying, "I belong here," even when someone tried to make her feel like she didn't. And it was about us, her parents, finally standing behind her with more than just words. Zaya never talks about the box anymore. She doesn't need to, but I kept it. It's in a drawer in my bedroom right next to her first baby shoes and the hospital bracelet from the day she was born. I keep it not because I want to remember the pain, but because I want to remember the strength it took to face it. The strength in her voice, the quiet power in her choice. She's only 7, but she taught me something I'll carry forever. Family is not who makes the biggest show of loving you when people are watching. It's not who shares your last name or your blood type. Family is who shows up when it matters, who protects you when it's hard, who makes you feel safe when the rest of the world makes you feel small. Zaya has that now, not because someone gave it to her, but because she claimed it for herself. And in doing that, she gave it to us too. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone you're fighting for, or someone you finally stood up to, then take a second to like this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear they're not alone. Leave a comment below. I read every single one, and your stories matter here. And if you want more true stories about real moments that change everything, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. There's more to come. Because sometimes the smallest voices carry the loudest truth, and we're here to listen. The judge looked directly at me, his voice calm but cold. I see no evidence that the child is safer with her. I couldn't speak. My hands were shaking. Every breath felt like it was catching in my throat. I glanced across the courtroom and saw Brandon, my ex-husband, sitting with that smug grin he always wears when he knows he's winning. Next to him, Cassidy, his new wife, leaned over and whispered something into his ear. He chuckled under his breath. She turned slightly and looked straight at me. I could read her lips. She lost. That was the moment it hit me. After months of preparing, documenting, praying for someone to believe me, I was about to lose custody of my daughter. Not because I was a bad mother, not because I didn't love her more than anything in the world, but because I didn't have the right kind of proof. The kind that fits neatly into court documents, the kind that doesn't come with a child's fear or a mother's gut instinct. Brandon had painted me as unstable, over-emotional, unfit. He told the court I worked nights and left our daughter unattended. He brought up my past struggle with anxiety, conveniently leaving out that it was during our marriage when I was dealing with his cheating, his control, his gaslighting. He told them Cassidy had been a stabilizing force, that she was great with kids, that their home was peaceful. Meanwhile, our daughter, Seren, sat quietly with the child advocate, legs swinging, hair tied in a neat braid I'd done that morning before we left, her little hands folded in her lap. She was being so good, so still, too still. The judge looked down at his papers. I could see him getting ready to speak. I knew that tone. That rhythm. He was preparing to deliver the ruling. My stomach twisted so hard it hurt. I reached for something, anything inside myself to stop what was coming, but nothing came out. Not words, not strength. I had already said everything I could. Then, just as he opened his mouth to speak, a small voice cut through the room. "Mom," everyone turned. Serene had stood up from her seat. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Her hand gripped something by her side, a pink tablet. One I hadn't seen her take that morning. She looked straight at me, then up at the judge. "Mom," she said again, her voice steady, "can I show him the video you didn't know I saved?" The room went still. I felt my heart stop. The judge blinked, clearly caught off guard. "What video?" Seren took a step forward and held the tablet out in both hands. "It's from Daddy's house." Brandon was out of his chair in an instant. Your Honor, she's 7. She doesn't understand what... The judge held up a hand, silencing him. His eyes never left Seren. Bring it here. The bailiff stepped forward, gently took the tablet from her, and brought it to the judge's bench. Brandon was fuming, whispering angrily to Cassidy. She looked pale now, the blood drained from her face. I couldn't breathe. I didn't even know what was on that tablet. I hadn't seen her record anything. I hadn't told her to. I never wanted to put that kind of responsibility on her shoulders. But something in her had decided to act. On her own. Quietly, bravely. She looked back at me and smiled just a little. Not a happy smile, a brave one. The kind that says, "It's okay, Mom. I've got us." And just like that, everything started to shift. My name is Naomi Ellery, and for most of my life, I thought I was pretty good at hiding pain. I had to be. My childhood taught me how to smile when things were breaking behind my eyes. My marriage taught me how to stay quiet when I wanted to scream. And motherhood taught me how to keep going even when every part of me wanted to give up. But nothing prepared me for the day I realized I might lose my daughter. Not to tragedy, not to illness, but to the very man I had spent years trying to escape. Brandon and I had been together for nearly a decade. From the outside, we looked like a perfect couple. He was charming, well-spoken, clean-cut, the kind of man who could say all the right things in front of the right people. At home, behind closed doors, he was someone else entirely. Controlling, dismissive, manipulative in ways I didn't understand until much later. When I got pregnant with Seren, things changed. For a while, it seemed like we might be okay. He brought me flowers. He read parenting books. He held my hand at doctor's appointments, but it didn't last. Once Seren was born and the attention wasn't on him anymore, the mask slipped. He didn't hit me, not in the way people think of abuse. But words can bruise, too. He tore into me piece by piece until I barely recognized the woman in the mirror. I stopped wearing makeup. I stopped calling friends. I stopped dreaming. It took me 3 years to find the strength to leave. I filed for divorce the night he screamed at Seren, so loudly she wet herself. She was 4. She apologized to him as she cried. That night, I packed what I could and drove to my mother's house with Seren asleep in the back seat. My mom, June, took us in. She's tough, a retired school teacher who believes in truth and consequences. She raised me on her own after my dad left. She's been through storms, so she recognized the weather in my eyes. She gave us her spare room and started making tea every night the way she used to when I was little. Just having her nearby made things feel possible again. I found work as a night shift nurse. It's exhausting, but it pays the bills. My schedule is upside down, and I live in a rented duplex that smells like mildew when it rains. But it's ours. Seren has a little bookshelf full of fairy tales and a nightlight shaped like the moon. I keep trying to build something stable, something she can feel safe in. But Brandon didn't let go. He filed for joint custody almost immediately, and because he had never been arrested, never left a bruise, the court saw no reason not to allow it. He got weekend visits. At first, Seren would come back quiet, withdrawn. She stopped drawing for a while. She started wetting the bed again. She wouldn't talk to me about what happened there, only that Cassidy, Brandon's new wife, didn't like when she cried. Cassidy came into the picture like a thunderclap. She was younger, pretty in an Instagram-filtered kind of way, and always dressed like she was headed to a business meeting. Brandon married her 6 months after our divorce was finalized. She moved into my old house and started playing the role of doting stepmother. She posted pictures of Seren smiling on Facebook and used captions like, "Our perfect little blended family." But Seren's eyes in those photos were never smiling. I started keeping notes. I took pictures of every bruise, every scratch, every time Seren said she fell down the stairs, but wouldn't meet my eyes. I recorded her nightmares when she'd wake up screaming and shaking. I brought it all to my lawyer, but he told me it was circumstantial. We needed hard evidence. And so I braced myself for court. I stayed up late preparing statements. I worked extra shifts to pay for a custody evaluator. I tried to believe the truth would be enough, that someone would see past Brandon's polished lies and understand what was really happening. But the closer the hearing came, the more doubt crept in. I'd seen how people believed him. He had a way of twisting things, of making me seem irrational just by staying calm. I knew I was walking into a courtroom that wasn't built to understand quiet pain. The morning of the hearing, I woke up before dawn. Seren was still asleep, curled up under her favorite quilt with her arms wrapped around her stuffed giraffe. I kissed her forehead and whispered, "I love you." Then I got dressed, packed my evidence, and prayed that someone, anyone, would finally listen. What I didn't know was that Seren had already found a way to speak. The courthouse smelled like dust and old coffee, the kind of smell that settles in your clothes and follows you home. I walked in alone, gripping my folder so tightly my knuckles hurt. Inside were all the photos, the notes, the drawings Serene had made, everything I had gathered over the last year to show the court what she couldn't say out loud. Brandon was already seated with his attorney. His suit looked expensive. His smile came easy. Cassidy sat next to him in a navy dress, her arms crossed, her legs neatly tucked beneath the bench, like she was attending a brunch, not a custody hearing. They looked like the picture of stability, and I hated how convincing it all was. The courtroom filled slowly. My mother sat in the back row, her hands folded, her face unreadable. The child advocate led Seren to the bench reserved for minors. She sat quietly, feet barely touching the floor. Her pink backpack rested on her lap. She didn't look scared. She looked small, smaller than I remembered her being just that morning. When the judge entered, everyone rose. He was tall, serious, and spoke with a voice that didn't invite questions. He introduced the case, reviewed the timeline, and opened the floor for each side. Brandon's attorney stood first. He began by praising Brandon's character, his stable employment, his marriage to Cassidy, and the positive environment of their home. He mentioned my anxiety. He brought up my night shifts, how Seren spent evenings with my mother, how I had changed addresses twice since the divorce. He called me inconsistent. I sat still as he picked apart my life with surgical precision. He didn't lie. He just told pieces of the truth that sounded uglier when stacked together. Then it was my turn. I stood up and gave everything I had. I told the judge about Seren's nightmares, about the bruises she couldn't explain, about the time she flinched when someone knocked on the front door. I explained how I had documented everything. I handed over drawings Seren had made, showing a stick figure girl behind bars crying. I submitted voice recordings of her whispering that Cassidy didn't like her, that Daddy yelled a lot, that she wanted to stay home with me. The judge listened, but I could tell it wasn't landing. His expression didn't change. When I finished, he asked if there was any physical evidence, any video, any witness. I looked down at my shoes. No, Your Honor. The courtroom went quiet. Brandon leaned back in his chair with that smug tilt of the chin I had come to hate. Cassidy leaned in and whispered something in his ear. He smiled. Then he stood and spoke for himself. He told the court that he wanted what was best for Seren, that he supported my role in her life, but that she needed structure. He said I was emotional, that I was struggling to keep up. He used the word unstable. He wrapped it in polite language, but it cut like a blade. He ended by saying he and Cassidy had created a nurturing home, and he would never expose Seren to harm. I wanted to scream, but I knew that would only prove his point. The judge asked to speak with Seren privately, then called for a short recess. I sat down hard, my legs shaky. My mother leaned forward and squeezed my shoulder. "You did what you could." I wasn't sure it was enough. When we returned, the judge summarized what he had reviewed. He said that while he saw signs of concern, there was no concrete proof of abuse. He noted the conflicting testimonies, the lack of medical reports, the absence of objective evidence. Then he paused. I held my breath. My palms were slick with sweat. "I see no evidence," he said, "that the child is safer with her." I didn't hear anything after that. The words echoed and twisted until everything felt distant. My body sat still, but my heart was screaming. I looked at Seren. Her head was bowed. Her fingers clutched the straps of her backpack. Across the room, Brandon smirked. Cassidy whispered, "She lost." Something inside me broke. I thought that was the end, but it wasn't. Because then, Seren stood up. Serene stood up slowly, both hands gripping her backpack. Her voice was quiet, but in the silence that followed the judge's ruling, it was the only thing anyone could hear. "Mom," she said, her voice calm but clear, "can I show him the video you didn't know I saved?" Everything in the room stopped. The judge raised his eyebrows. Brandon looked over, confused, then concerned. Cassidy turned sharply toward Seren. I sat frozen, heart pounding in my chest, unsure if I had heard her right. "What video?" the judge asked, his tone cautious but curious. Serene didn't answer right away. Instead, she unzipped her backpack and pulled out her pink tablet. It had a small crack along the edge and stickers of stars and bunnies covering the back. She hugged it close for a second, then stepped forward and held it out to the child advocate. The judge looked down from the bench. "Please bring that to me," he instructed. The child advocate glanced at me, then walked with Serene toward the bailiff, who gently took the tablet and brought it up to the bench. The judge adjusted his glasses and tapped the screen, scanning its contents. He pressed play. No one spoke. Brandon shifted in his seat, visibly nervous now. Cassidy sat rigid, eyes locked on the judge. I didn't move. My hands were clenched so tightly in my lap I could feel my fingernails digging into my palms. A few seconds passed. Then the judge looked up sharply. "Where and when was this recorded?" he asked. Serene's voice remained steady. "At Daddy's house last month. I used the camera app." The judge nodded and returned to the screen. He turned the volume up. We all heard it. Brandon's voice, loud and unmistakable, echoing from another room. He was yelling. Not frustrated, not annoyed, but full of rage. Accusations and insults flew in every direction. Then Cassidy's voice entered the frame. She was yelling too, sharper, more targeted. The sound of something slamming, a chair or a door. Serene's quiet sobs could be heard under it all. Then Cassidy's voice, cold and direct. "If you don't stop crying, I will give you something to cry about." Then the sound of a hand hitting something, a thud, a whimper, and Serene's voice muffled and scared. "Ow, please don't." I couldn't listen anymore. My throat was tight, my stomach churning. I turned away, but the damage had already been done. The courtroom, once filled with murmurs and whispered judgments, was silent. The judge took off his glasses. His face, up until now composed and detached, had changed. His jaw was tight. His voice, when he spoke, was different. "This is extremely serious." Brandon stood up. "Your Honor, that recording was taken without consent. It's manipulated. She probably—" "Sit down, Mr. Ellery." Brandon's mouth opened again, but the bailiff took a step forward. He sat. Cassidy looked pale now. Her arms were crossed so tightly they looked locked. She leaned toward Brandon, whispering furiously, but he wouldn't look at her. The judge spoke again. "This video constitutes credible evidence of potential child endangerment and emotional abuse. The court will immediately refer this matter to Child Protective Services and law enforcement for further investigation." He turned toward me. "Effective immediately, sole physical and legal custody is granted to Ms. Naomi Ellery. Mr. Ellery is restricted to supervised visitation until a full evaluation is conducted. This ruling takes effect today." I didn't move. I couldn't. The words took a moment to reach me, to register in my bones. Then Seren turned and looked at me. That same brave smile from before, just a little wider now. She didn't run. She walked to me slowly and wrapped her arms around my waist. I bent down and held her, my cheek against her hair, the tablet still in her small hand. The courtroom buzzed back to life behind us. The bailiff was speaking with the clerk. The attorneys were whispering to their clients. Brandon sat with his head in his hands. Cassidy stared straight ahead like she couldn't see anything at all. I didn't care. I didn't look at them again. Serene had saved herself. She had saved us both. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt safe. I sat there with Serene's arms wrapped around my waist as the courtroom moved in a blur around us. The judge was still speaking, but I only caught fragments. Emergency custody, immediate protection order, investigation launched, supervised visitation. Every word pulled us further away from the nightmare we had been living in. The bailiff approached and quietly asked me to come forward and sign a temporary custody transfer form. Serene's fingers tightened on mine, and I brought her with me. I wasn't letting go, not even for a second. As I stood there, pen shaking in my hand, I looked up at the bench. The judge met my eyes and gave a small nod, the kind that says, "Now I understand." He didn't smile, but his expression had changed. There was something in it that hadn't been there before. Recognition, a kind of silent apology. I signed the form. When I turned around, I saw Brandon still in his seat. His face was tight, red around the edges, his jaw clenched. Cassidy sat beside him, like a statue. Her hands were folded so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Neither of them looked at me. Neither looked at Seren. Seren watched them quietly as we walked past. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Her truth had already spoken louder than anything either of them had tried to say for months. Outside the courtroom, the air hit different, brighter, quieter, the kind of silence that follows a storm. I bent down and looked Seren in the eyes. "Where did you learn to do that?" I asked her. She blinked like she wasn't sure if she was in trouble. "I heard you tell Nana that you needed proof, that people don't believe unless there's proof. So I used the tablet. I hid it under the couch pillow. I didn't tell you because I thought, if you knew, you'd be scared." My throat burned. "You were scared," I said. She nodded. "But you did it anyway." She nodded again. I pulled her into my arms and held her so tightly I could feel her heartbeat against mine. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't holding her to protect her. I was holding her because she had protected herself. We got into the car, and as I buckled her seatbelt, she looked at me and asked, "Am I going back to Daddy's house this weekend?" "No," I said, "not anymore." She didn't smile. She just let out a long breath and leaned her head back against the seat, the kind of relief that even a child recognizes when it's been carried too long. When we got home, my mom was waiting at the kitchen table. She stood when she saw us, tears already in her eyes. She wrapped Seren in a hug and then looked at me like she was seeing me again for the first time. "I knew you'd get her back," she whispered. "I didn't," I said. "She got us back." That night, Seren crawled into bed beside me. She fell asleep with her head on my shoulder, clutching the same stuffed giraffe she had carried since she was 3. I watched her chest rise and fall, peaceful, safe. The next morning, I called my lawyer. We filed for a permanent custody modification. I submitted the video as evidence. The police opened an investigation. Cassidy was charged with child endangerment. Brandon was placed under a formal review by Child Services. His weekend visits were suspended, and a guardian ad litem was assigned to monitor all future interactions. I started hearing from people I hadn't expected. The court-appointed therapist offered additional support. A woman from a local shelter reached out and connected us with a counselor for children recovering from emotional trauma. My workplace adjusted my schedule so I could be home more during the day. The world didn't change overnight, but for the first time, it felt like it could. The following weekend, Seren and I went to the park. We walked by the lake, bought lemonades from a stand near the playground, and sat on the swings until the sun began to set. At one point, she looked up at me and asked, "Can we plant something? Like a flower or a tree?" I asked her why. Because everything feels new now, and when things feel new, you should plant something. So we did. The next day, we went to the garden center, picked out a small tree with pink blossoms, and planted it in the backyard. She named it the Restart Tree. Every time I look at it, I remember that courtroom, the silence after her voice, the sound of truth breaking through lies, and the moment I realized that sometimes, even at 7 years old, a child can change everything. It's been 5 months since the courtroom fell silent, and Seren stood with that tablet in her hands. 5 months since the judge reversed the decision and gave us back the life I was afraid we had lost forever. A lot has changed since then. Some of it happened quickly, like the investigation into Brandon and Cassidy. Others happened slowly, like the way Seren started sleeping through the night again. No more screaming from nightmares. No more waking up and asking if she had to go back. The court made the custody change permanent after a full review. Brandon's visitation rights are now limited and supervised, and only allowed in the presence of a licensed child advocate. Cassidy was charged with child endangerment and fined. She took a plea deal, and part of her agreement prevents her from having any unsupervised contact with Seren for the next 3 years. Seren still asks questions. Sometimes she wants to talk about the day in court. Sometimes she just wants to know why adults lie. I never give her complicated answers. I tell her the truth in words she understands. Some people lie because they don't want the truth to change things. Some people hurt others because they're hurting inside. And sometimes people stay silent when they should speak up because they're scared. But the most important thing I remind her is that what she did that day was not just brave, it was right. She carries a quiet kind of strength now. Not loud, not proud, but steady. She's starting to laugh more. She paints on weekends. She made a friend at school named Mia, and they've become inseparable. They sit together at lunch. They draw unicorns and foxes and leave sticky notes on each other's desks that say things like, "You're magic and we're best forever." As for me, I've learned to breathe again. I used to live in fear, measuring every moment by how it might be used against me. I don't do that anymore. Still have hard days. I still carry the weight of everything we went through, but it's not the same kind of heavy. Now it feels like something earned, something we carried through and survived. My relationship with my mom grew stronger too. She never said, "I told you so." She just kept showing up. She helps me with Serene's homework when I'm tired. She cooks dinner twice a week. Sometimes we sit in the backyard and just watch Serene run through the grass, her arms stretched out like she's flying. That tree we planted is growing fast. Serene waters it every evening. She named it the Restart Tree, and the name stuck. It stands in the corner of our yard near the fence line, pink blossoms blooming stronger every week. It's become a symbol for us, a reminder that even after the ugliest winters, something good can take root. I've started journaling again. I write down the things I want Serene to know when she's older, not just about what happened in court, but about the kind of woman I hope she becomes. Brave, yes, but also kind. Strong, but not hardened. Smart enough to speak, but wise enough to listen. I tell her in writing what I tell her every night before bed. You are safe. You are loved. You are never alone. There are people who told me to stop fighting, that the courts rarely side with mothers without hard proof, that sometimes, even when you know something is wrong, the system won't see it until it's too late. I believed that for a while. I let that fear eat at me. But Serene didn't. Somehow, she found a way to tell the truth when I couldn't anymore. She reminded me that sometimes what saves us isn't the system or the law. Sometimes it's one moment of courage from someone we love. We're not broken. We're rebuilding. And the foundation this time is real. This story didn't end the way I thought it would. It ended better. Not because it was easy or fair, but because a little girl decided to speak when no one else would. That's what changed everything. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something, or reminded you of your own strength or someone else's, please take a second to like this video. Share it with someone who might need to hear it today. You never know who's waiting for a story like this to remind them they're not alone. I'd love to hear your thoughts or experiences in the comments. Whether you're a mom, a survivor, a child of divorce, or someone who's found the courage to speak up, your voice matters here. And if you want to hear more true stories that uncover the quiet power people carry, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's next. Thank you for watching, and thank you for listening, not just with your ears, but with your heart.